Hi everyone, it's Professor Hall. Welcome back. So we are continuing our discussion on Luong Ung's book, First They Killed My Father. Last time we talked about why this book. We went over a little bit of the history of the Cambodian Civil War. I gave you I gave you an overview, and then we talked about memoir, narration, tone, and structure, as you can see highlighted over here. So right now we're going to talk about characterization, which should be a very quick, quick thing to kind of discuss because there isn't much. It's interesting to me, you know, a character is a person in a book, and even in a memoir, the author is using rhetorical devices, as I mentioned last time, and she's using the elements of fiction in terms of setting, description, imagery, and she's also using characterization. So a character is a person in a book. In this case, they are real people because it's nonfiction and it's a memoir. And characterization is the way that the author develops those characters. So how she imbues them with personality traits. To me, and you might disagree when you read it, but I think we get a lot of the author, a lot through her narration, her point of view. We find out a lot about her personality, what she's like, that kind of thing. We also learn quite a bit about her father, because she looks up to him and he's really a hero in her eyes. Her mother to a certain extent, and then she has a number of brothers and sisters. So there's Koi, Cave, Cho, and Meng, Kim, and Gek. And I think in part because she has so many brothers and sisters, we don't really get to know all of them all that well. Also because she is quite young when the family is separated. And so the siblings that travel with her and are with her through most of the book, we do get to know them a little bit more. But there are other siblings that are kind of defined just by one character trait. So this is Meng is the oldest brother and he's the leader. That kind of thing. So I want you to kind of look for that and wonder to yourselves why that is and how we get to know some of the characters and how some of them, because of the refugee status of the family, we don't always get to know. In terms of conflict, in literature, there are a number of different types of conflict. So we have person versus person, we have person versus society, and we have person versus nature. And those are kind of the three that we're going to see the most in this book. Luong will come into conflict with different people at various times. When she's very little, she has some disagreements with one of her brothers. Later on, she might struggle against somebody who is the head of the work camp and kind of hold some resentment against them. But for the most part, the conflict in this book is person versus society conflict, that the whole of society is shifting, changing in the middle of this war, in the middle of turmoil, and it is up to her to survive that. As part of that conflict, kind of going along with it, is the idea of person versus nature. So that basically the natural elements of, at various times, weather, and hunger in particular, long walks that she's forced to go on. These natural elements are against her, but essentially they're part of the conflict with the society. And the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, and then later also the troops from Vietnam or the soldiers from Vietnam, who are putting so many harsh conditions on these people that they then have to face the natural elements, which they wouldn't really otherwise. But I think that those two things kind of working together do make her question And we'll talk about religion in a minute, but make her question like fate and things of that nature. Make her ask some of those larger questions. So those are some things I'd like you to look for. You know how war forces people to battle against nature as well as battling against society, and then some of the interpersonal conflicts that kind of arise because of the conditions of war. That again, if you're scrambling for food and you have to share it with your brothers and sisters, but you are literally starving, right? That kind of thing. There's a lot of internal conflict as well, which I should mention, but I think that's, that comes along with the narration and tone that we talked about before. She has this, and I guess we'll come into this, she has a very innocent childhood in the very beginning of the book and really does not understand what's going on around her. As the book progresses, the internal conflicts start to build up within her, that she's trying to survive, but she also needs to, at various times, help family members, even though she feels kind of inadequate to do so, that she feels very angry, very frustrated, all of those kind of things, that she begins to seek revenge and really want revenge. And there is a particular scene toward the end of the book that, again, I'm not going to spoil for you, but I think that kind of represents the culmination of some of those feelings. And when the incident finishes, how she feels about it and whether she feels kind of let down or dissatisfied, that's something to look for as well. But how are children innocent, and how do these conditions of war take away that innocence and make them grow up before their time? The bonds of family are quite apparent with her family. We have here a society that obviously very much values the family unit and also extended family. So later on, we see her brother is married and he has in-laws, and then they become part of the family. We also see uncles and cousins and things of that nature. And what basically again happens is that because of the war, these family bonds are forced apart and families are forced to separate for survival and for the sake of survival. So the thing that I'd like you to kind of think about are the ways that those familial bonds still hold together, even though there are times of great trial. So, how do the siblings look out for each other? How are they trying to reunite or able to be reunited at various points in the book? How does, at one point, Luong goes from the work camp and kind of is able to sneak to see her mother. Why does she risk that? What are the other children doing to still help their mother and their youngest sister? So I wanted to kind of think about why the separations occur, how they affect the children. Also, there's a point where they're forced away by their mother, and she acts like she doesn't care about them, but really she's doing it for their protection because their father's already been taken. So those are some things I'd like you to look for. And how do children try to survive without their parents in a war-torn country in particular? Survival is a huge theme in this book. This is the story of someone who survived a war, and she is telling you basically how she did that. So through hunger, through work, through small skirmishes and conflicts, there are 2 different times where people attempt to sexually assault her, and she is not assaulted, but there are attempts made. So she's able to survive that as well, and it's kind of indicative of what was going on in that time period and to other women during the war, which is something that often happens in war. So the natural elements that I talked about already, but also things like cleverness and intelligence, lying on your feet, different people that she's able to persuade into doing certain things or believing certain things, and how, again, kind of connected the idea of family. So the author on her own, and then also with some of her family members, trying to survive and how they get through all these different situations. Religion and spirituality is interesting because a lot of memoirs focus on spirituality, but this one really does not. We have a few mentions of religion from the author, but it really seems to be more about cultural heritage and remembrance than it does any specific belief in God or anything like that. But we do have some experiences that she has in her book. Again, it's kind of difficult to tell if she's trying to have like a rhetorical device or kind of using the elements of fiction when she describes what different people are going through. She describes at one point an attack on her brother as he tries to steal some food. She describes the death of her father, and another incident involving her mother, almost as if she's there. And she kind of implies that she might have had almost like an out of body experience and it's connected to the stars and to praying. But when that happens and when she prays, it's not like an organized religion type of way. It's more like trying to connect to God or the universe or that kind of thing. So I'd like you to kind of note where she seems to have those spiritual experiences and what she seems to be trying to say there. I kind of already talked about revenge and how that affects the tone. As a theme in the book, she really begins to obsess about this idea of revenge. And then colorism and social class. So just to kind of explain, racism is when there is discrimination against people because they are of a certain race. Colorism is a little bit more subtle than that. It has to do with discriminating against people because their skin is a certain color. So what I mean by that is that for many years in the United States, people of African American descent who have lighter skin were sometimes treated better than people who were African American and had darker skin. What ends up happening in Cambodia is that with this particular author and the way that she describes things, her mother is of Chinese descent. And because of that, she has a lighter skin tone. That seems to be true of many of the middle class or upper class families in Cambodia, that they have lighter skin. So in the beginning of the book, her life is quite comfortable and she's kind of part of that upper class where she's getting an education that includes French classes, even at the age of 5, and that kind of thing. When the Khmer Rouge takes over, this really is flipped completely. And people who are communists and in the agrarian sector, so they're farming, they're looking down on people from the city. They are targeting people from the city to kill them, and they really are making fun of and discriminating against people with lighter skin in favor of people with darker skin, many of whom were farming and poor and that kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons that they supported this communist regime. When you have a communist regime or a dictatorship come in, and oftentimes it's supported by people who were oppressed by the former regime. And so that's sort of what ends up happening. So I want you to kind of notice some of the things that she talks about in terms of her house, her education, the marketplace, the place that she lives at the beginning of the book, to note some of those markers of social class. How are those stripped away? And then how does the society kind of reverse so that later on, instead of being thought of as beautiful, she's thought of as ugly, she is made fun of by children and that kind of thing. And lastly, propaganda. Well, Propaganda is really part of almost any war. But it's interesting the different types of propaganda that she's exposed to, I think, particularly because she is a child and she's talking about these things from a child's perspective. So at first, it's all about the Khmer Republic, this new republic that's come in and ousted the prince and gotten rid of the monarchy and tried to establish a democratic system. Then it's propaganda about the Khmer Rouge and how great they are and how wonderful they are and how we're working hard for them. And then later it stops being about the Khmer Rouge as a whole and starts being more about Pol Pot and talking about him like he's the fearless leader and he's wonderful and great and all of that kind of thing. And the children here are really, the new regime is trying to re-educate them and they're trying to brainwash them through this propaganda that they're kind of spewing and that kind of thing. There's also propaganda against the Vietnamese as the conflict there comes into Cambodia and as the Vietnamese soldiers invade as well. There does not seem to be anything about the United States in particular, which is interesting. And I don't know if that just wasn't part of the rhetoric or if she just left that out being now a citizen of this country. But certainly she tries to resist this re-education because, unlike a lot of the other children there who were from farming families, she is not. And she knows what life was like before. And also, they tore her family apart and they killed her father. So she's quite bitter and angry by that point as well, which kind of helps her in a way and connects back to that idea of survival. Sometimes anger can be a powerful tool when trying to survive. And instead of feeling sorry for oneself, you get angry and you fight, basically. And that is essentially what this book is about. It's about one girl's journey through this horrifying war and her fight to survive and later on even thrive in, and the realizations that she comes to from her childhood into her, you know, not even adolescence quite yet, but very early stages of pre-adolescence, and how she relates to her family and her culture and the memories that she lost and that kind of thing. So it is in some points a very sad book, but I do hope that you enjoy reading it and I hope that you learn a lot from it. I think there are a lot of lessons here and I think it's a fascinating story. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating story. That's it for this time. And next time we'll come back and we'll talk about our next book. Thanks, everyone.